A man has been arrested and charged with shooting and killing his common-law wife. 29-year-old Bryan Dickerson is in the Brazos County Jail. According to an arrest report, Dickerson called police and admitted to the shooting to detectives. Police responded to the home in the 500 block of 18th. Dickerson told detectives he shot Alexis Walls following an argument and fight between the two. Dickerson is being held on a $250,000 bond.
No! No!
You gotta let us do our job.
Where is he at? Where is he?
You know that you know me.
I don't give a. Where is he? Where is he?
He's in our custody.
I don't give a. Where is he? That's my daughter. Only daughter. Where is he at? Where is he?
Sir.
Sir, it's no way I can be calm like this.
I know. There's nothing I can say right now. I understand. There's nothing I can say right now. Okay? But he is not going anywhere right now. Come here.
I know.
You didn't want to be together with him.
Oh, Lord Jesus. You killed my father. You taking it
Oh my God. Oh God.
This guy. What this
Oh my God.
Oh, Lord.
The rifle was already loaded. 15 shots fired in a hallway into the body of a 23-year-old mother who had done nothing wrong. And the only witness was an 18-month-old baby boy. Bryan, Texas, February 7, 2025, just past midnight. The neighborhood was quiet. Most people on East 18th Street were asleep. But inside one home, a young woman named Alexis Walls was fighting for her life and losing. She never saw it coming. One moment they were arguing, the next, silence. No screams, no struggle, just 15 bullets, a crying toddler, and a man picking up his phone to call 911 not to get help, to confess. He told the dispatcher exactly what he had done. He stayed at the scene. He waited for the police to arrive and take him away. Calm, collected, like a man who had already made his peace with what he had just destroyed. But here is what will haunt you about this case. Bryan Dickerson didn't kill Alexis because she cheated on him. He killed her because he thought she did. There was no evidence, no proof, no reason, just a loaded rifle and a jealousy so violent it swallowed a young woman's entire future whole and left a little boy without the one person in the world who truly understood him. Who was Alexis Walls? What really happened inside that home on the night everything went dark? And how does a man fire 15 shots into the mother of his child and then calmly dial 911? Stay with me, because this story is only just beginning. Welcome to Real Crime Stories. If you're someone who believes that victims deserve to have their stories told with truth, care, and the respect they were denied in their final moments, then this is exactly the right channel for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment below letting me know your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss a case. Every story we cover here matters, and Alexis Walls, she matters more than words can say. Now let's get into it. She came into this world on October 9, 2001, the youngest of 3 children, and from the very first breath, Alexis made her presence known. That was simply who she was. Her family had a name for her. They called her a hurricane, not because she was destructive, but because she arrived everywhere with a force that rearranged the atmosphere. Rooms felt different when Alexis stepped into them. Conversations deepened. Laughter came easier. Strangers became friends within minutes of meeting her because she possessed something rare, a genuine, unfiltered warmth that drew people in without effort. Those closest to her described a young woman who never encountered a person she couldn't connect with. She was the friend you called at 2 a.m. when your world was falling apart because she answered every single time. She listened. She cared. She showed up. In a generation often accused of surface-level relationships, Alexis Walls built real ones, the kind that leave permanent marks on the people fortunate enough to have known her. But beneath all that radiant energy lived a young mother, quietly engineering a future for someone she loved even more than herself. His name was Zalen, 18 months old, diagnosed with autism, and completely devoted to the woman who devoted everything to him. Those who watched Alexis with her son described a connection that went beyond ordinary motherhood. She understood him on a frequency nobody else could access. His moods, his needs, his particular way of experiencing the universe. Where others might have felt overwhelmed navigating early parenthood alongside a special needs diagnosis, Alexis leaned in. She educated herself. She adapted. She showed up for Zalen the same relentless way she showed up for everyone, completely and without reservation. And she was building something bigger: college applications, enrollment paperwork, a plan carefully constructed to give her son a life with more doors than the ones currently available. Alexis understood that ambition wasn't selfish. It was the greatest act of love a parent could offer a child. She wanted more for Zalen, so she was going out and getting it. That was the version of Alexis Walls that existed before Brandon Dickerson. The two had been together long enough to build a shared life inside a modest residence on East 18th Street in Bryan, a medium-sized city sitting adjacent to College Station, home of Texas A&M University. On the surface, it appeared to be a household moving forward, a young couple raising a son together, two adults navigating the complicated terrain of early parenthood under one roof. But something darker had taken root inside Brandon Dickerson. Jealousy. Not the fleeting, momentary kind that most people experience and release. This was something more consuming, more dangerous, a slow-burning obsession with the idea that Alexis was being unfaithful, despite having zero concrete evidence pointing in that direction. Investigators would later confirm there was nothing. No texts, no witnesses, no proof of any kind to support what had been eating away at him. None of it mattered. Because in Dickerson's mind, suspicion had already graduated into certainty. And certainty, in the hands of a man with unchecked rage and access to a loaded firearm, is one of the most lethal combinations imaginable. February 7, 2025 began like any other night on East 18th Street. The area was quiet, ordinary, the kind of neighborhood where nothing remarkable ever seemed to happen. Zalen was somewhere nearby, too young to understand tension, too small to protect the person protecting him every single day. Then the argument erupted. Accusations flew across the room, denials, raised voices cutting through the midnight air. Alexis stood her ground because she had nothing to hide and no reason to shrink. She was innocent, and innocence has a particular kind of courage attached to it. But courage cannot stop a bullet. And somewhere during that confrontation, Brandon Dickerson made a decision that would obliterate 3 lives simultaneously: his own, his son's, and the hurricane who had made every room she ever entered feel more alive. He reached for the rifle, and Alexis Walls ran out of time. The hallway was narrow. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no exit between Alexis and the barrel of a rifle held by a man who had already made up his mind about what he was going to do next. Dickerson pulled the trigger. Once, twice, again. 15 times. He fired 15 times into the body of a 23-year-old woman preparing to enroll in college, a woman whose son needed her in ways most parents never have to fully comprehend, a woman who had answered every phone call, dried every tear, and shown up for every single person fortunate enough to occupy space in her orbit. 15 shots in a hallway. And when the last one discharged, the house went completely silent. Except for Zalen, 18 months old, too young to process what his eyes had just registered, too small to understand that the person who decoded his world, who spoke his unspoken language, who planned an entire academic future just to secure his tomorrow, was gone. He sat in that silence, physically unharmed but present for every devastating second of it. a toddler absorbing a trauma that psychologists say can embed itself into a developing nervous system long before conscious memory forms. No child should ever carry that. But Zalen would carry it for the rest of his life. Brandon Dickerson stood in that hallway and surveyed the destruction his jealousy had manufactured. Then he did something that investigators, prosecutors, and everyone who has followed this case since found equally chilling and bizarre. He picked up his phone, not to call a neighbor, not to seek medical intervention for the woman bleeding on the floor of their shared home. He dialed emergency services with one singular purpose: to tell dispatchers exactly what he had done. Calmly, deliberately, without hesitation. Around 12:40 in the morning, Bryan Police Department officers responded to the residents at East 18th Street following that confession call. What they encountered upon arrival confirmed everything Dickerson had already admitted over the phone. Alexis Walls lay deceased inside the home. Zalen was still there, alone, surrounded by a silence that had replaced his mother. Dickerson did not attempt to flee. He did not manufacture an alibi or construct an alternative version of the night's events. He stayed at the scene, cooperative and composed, and surrendered to officers without further incident.
Your brother was on scene.
I've seen him, but I just don't protect my son with my wife's family.
Okay. Well, I made sure that the sergeant on scene was aware of that, and it's a little bit of a process before he can go to anybody, so.
I know the state has authority right now.
That composure disturbed people, perhaps more than anything else about the case, because it suggested something unsettling about the psychology driving the entire tragedy. This was not a man spiraling in panic after an impulsive act. This was someone who, having executed exactly what he set out to do, simply waited for the consequences to arrive, as though the violence itself had been the destination, and everything after it was just paperwork. Investigators moved quickly. Dickerson was taken into custody and charged with murder. He was booked into Brazos County Jail, with bond initially set at $250,000. The Bryan Police Department secured the scene, gathered evidence, and began building a case that would ultimately require very little courtroom drama, because the perpetrator had handed them a confession before they even laced up their boots. Prosecutors began reviewing everything. Every detail of that night, every angle of the relationship, the history between Dickerson and Alexis, the complete absence of any factual basis for his accusations of infidelity. What emerged from that review was a portrait of a relationship increasingly suffocated by one man's irrational, escalating suspicion, a suspicion that Alexis had no mechanism to disprove because it had never been rooted in reality to begin with. You cannot argue with a delusion armed with a rifle. Back on East 18th Street, the neighborhood that had been asleep when all of this unfolded slowly woke up to devastating news. A mother was dead, a toddler was traumatized, and a community was left grappling with a question that domestic violence cases almost always generate. Were there signs? Was there something anyone could have interrupted before it reached a hallway and 15 bullets? Those questions would surface again inside a courtroom. But first, Brazos County needed to decide what justice looked like for Alexis Walls. And for little Zalen, watching from a distance he was far too young to understand, justice moved slowly. But in the case of Alexis Walls, it arrived with a weight that matched the magnitude of what had been taken. Nearly 1 full year after that rifle discharged 15 times in a narrow hallway on East 18th Street, Brandon Dickerson stood inside the 85th District Court in Brazos County and entered 2 words that foreclosed any possibility of denial, any alternative narrative, any version of events that shifted blame away from where it permanently belonged. Guilty. February 3, 2026. Judge Kyle Hawthorne presiding. Dickerson's defense attorneys issued a statement on his behalf acknowledging that their client accepted full responsibility for his actions. They noted he carried sincere regret for everything that transpired. But regret, as Alexis's loved ones understood better than anyone in that courtroom, cannot reopen a casket, cannot restore an 18-month-old boy's earliest memories to something other than what they now contained, cannot give back a single second of the future that got erased in under a minute inside a Texas home while the rest of the neighborhood slept. Judge Hawthorne sentenced Dickerson to the maximum penalty available under the plea agreement, 50 years. Brandon Dickerson will not breathe free air as a young man. He will age inside a prison system, while the son he orphaned grows up without either biological parent present to witness it. The boy Alexis poured every ounce of preparation and sacrifice into, the child she was enrolling in college courses to better provide for, will navigate adolescence, milestones, heartbreaks, and triumphs guided by his maternal grandparents, who stepped forward to raise him after losing their daughter. That detail alone carries an unbearable tenderness. Grandparents who should be attending recitals and birthday parties as loving supplementary figures are now primary caregivers, building a childhood for a boy with autism whose mother understood his specific needs in ways that cannot simply be transferred or replicated. They are doing it with grace. They are doing it with love. But they are doing it carrying grief that no parent should ever be asked to shoulder. The Brazos County District Attorney's Office released photographs of Alexis and Zaylin following the sentencing. Images of a radiant young woman holding her son, smiling, alive, full of the same energy that had earned her that nickname, the Hurricane, the ball of pure infectious joy who never encountered a stranger she couldn't transform into something closer. Prosecutors described her publicly as a light to everyone fortunate enough to have known her. That framing matters, because cases like this one carry a gravitational pull toward the perpetrator, toward analyzing his psychology, dissecting his motives, debating the adequacy of his punishment. And while those conversations hold legitimate value, they can quietly displace the person who deserves the center of every frame. Alexis Walls was not simply a victim of Brandon Dickerson's violence. She was a complete, vivid, irreplaceable human being with ambitions, relationships, a singular laugh, and a little boy who needed her in ways that will take years to fully surface. She mattered before February 7th, 2025. She matters now. Her family has made that explicitly understood. They are not retreating into private grief and allowing time to dim the urgency of her memory. They are writing letters, attending hearings, preparing testimony for future parole considerations to ensure that the institutional machinery processing Brandon Dickerson's sentence never loses sight of what generated it: 15 bullets, an innocent woman, and a toddler left in a silence no child should ever inherit. That advocacy is its own form of love. Transferred from Alexis to her family to the public record, and now into every conversation her story generates in courtrooms, living rooms, and comment sections across platforms where people are still learning her name for the very first time. This is why these stories get told, not to sensationalize suffering, not to reduce a human life to a headline, but because Alexis Walls existed. She laughed loudly and loved fiercely and planned carefully and deserved every single year she was denied. Zaylin deserved to grow up knowing her. And we owe it to both of them to make sure the world never forgets her name.